Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast of the Witch Trials. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. Today we're exploring how geography shaped one of history's most notorious witch hunts.
When we examine the Salem Witch Trials, we often focus on the key players and timeline of events. But another crucial element deserves our attention: the physical landscape where these events unfolded.
Our guest today, acclaimed historian Marilynne K. Roach, has spent decades mapping and studying the geography of the 1692 witch trials. Her meticulous research has helped identify crucial locations, including the execution site at Procter's Ledge.
Through her work with the Gallows Hill Project and creation of detailed historical maps, Roach shows us how property disputes, boundary lines, and travel distances played vital roles in shaping accusations and their spread.
From rural Salem Village to the bustling port town of Salem itself, and as far off as Maine, each location tells part of this complex story. Understanding these spaces helps us grasp how fear and suspicion moved through colonial New England communities.
In our conversation, Roach shares insights from her groundbreaking research while reminding us that these historical spaces continue to resonate with meaning today.
So join us as we explore the geography of fear with Marilynne K. Roach. Today we are going to consider the space and people of the Salem Witch Trials. It's a pleasure to welcome back Marilynne Roach, acclaimed historian and author of the Salem Witch Trials, a day-by-day chronicle of a community under siege, to the Witch Hunt podcast. Thank you for all your contributions to the remembrance of the Salem Witch Trials.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And how did the geography of Salem contribute to the spread of the witch hunt?
Because the panic started in Salem Village, which was on the rural side of town, a good ways from the port, where most of the money was to the government. It's out in the boonies, as far as other people are concerned. It spread within the village. And once it seemed that it was something that needed to be looked at by the law, and they started holding hearings, the magistrates came out from Salem to Salem Village, determined when there was enough going on to see if anybody should be questioned or obliged to stay for trial later. They couldn't do it later. That alerts the rest of the town, of course. And I imagine because the afflictions, the supposed bewitchment, went on for some weeks, or almost a month, really. It was known in the whole area, not just Salem, but contiguous towns too. So it was breaking news and juicy gossip. But once it's deemed that there was a witch conspiracy to worry about, because Mortigible was back she made up a story that they would accept, which sounded to them like a confession, because every time she said she wasn't a witch, they wouldn't believe it. Then she mentioned that there were others, 9, I think, and they knew the 3 they'd arrested, including titular Sarah Osborne, Sarah Good. Then people were left wondering who were the others and how many. And in fact, her what's called a confession described specters coming in Boston people. So it sounds a lot bigger than what they first feared. And it's sort of a pause for a couple of weeks before another arrest. But people are wondering who else in the neighborhood is up to no good with the devil. And that presumably they spent a couple of weeks hashing over who they didn't like and who would be unlikely suspect, and all sorts of people who had run-ins with their neighbors and in other towns too, or at least thought of them. There was a woman in Ipswich, Rachel Clinton, who had arguments around this time. But it really exploded later. Let's see, after the trials began, once the government had charter and could call a court to convene. Then the accusations sort of waked up a bit more again when somebody in Andover with a sick wife asked some of the supposed afflicted girls who could see into the invisible world to come and diagnose who's hurting his wife. And that spread to Andover, and that blew up there. So that, in fact, there were more people in Andover accused than there were in Salem. There were other towns where there was a few suspects, but Andover principally and Salem. It would one in each sleep. And then late in the day, a few in Gloucester. So it spread out. And the geography, of course, former Salem Village Minister George Burroughs was working in Maine as well at the time. And he had unpleasant relations with several villages when he decided he was going to move on. He's extradited from Maine, although Maine's part of Massachusetts. So that's just the geography. And those who escape generally in New York, which is Manhattan. So you need a map in the book to see how widespread it was. But the core of it, Salem area, Essex County, most, and into adjoining parts of it. Of course, I'm speaking of what to me is local history. So if I'm waving my hands around demonstrating something, it's because I'm thinking of a map.
Can you tell us about your Salem Village map and a little bit that you think is important to understand between yours and Charles Wentworth Upham's map?
Upham's map was one of my main sources, but the big source was the numerous articles that Sidney Purley wrote and published over a decade. The Essex Historical Collections and earlier in Essex Antiquarian. He was responsible. So I based it on a road map that was available when I was doing it back in the 1980s to get the proportions correct. And I used old USGA maps from like the end of the 19th century, so I could see where the swamps had been and others that the shoreline changed. And a lot of things have been filled in and other things have been dammed, so the wetland stuff. Or ponds weren't there originally or they were big since then, so it's changed a bit. Putting it together, you could see distances people had traveled to get places. The first time I went to Danvers on a Greyhound bus that has to make a stop in Danvers near where Joseph Putnam used to live. There was a rotary there, and I already got off the bus. And I walked towards Danvers, middle of Danvers, found the cemetery I wanted, found Rebecca Nurse House, which I visited then. And then I found a bus stop to take me to Salem and home on the train. And interestingly, I'd walked that far already. Interestingly enough, the bus didn't come. And I'm standing on a highway waiting for it. And decided I just had to walk to Salem to get the train. Of course, the bus came past me as I'd almost reached down, but I was very much aware of the distance. And I could see why people who lived in Salem Village and further, and of course, most of the Putnams lived further west than where the first bus. So that going into town to stand watch and also to go to meeting on Sabbaths is a long walk, and the roads are cut track. So that impressed me with my age. But it impresses me that they can travel so far within certain time span that they mentioned in the trials, like going up from Salem Village or Wills Hill and going to Topsfield to rearrest Mary S. and getting her back into jail before midnight. That's a lot of traveling. And I was in somebody else's car going from Salem to Ipswich. We passed where the farm had. But that, just the distances that people would walk or ride a horse, because not everybody thought when it's available. The only people who were traveling quickly were suspected that they weren't really there. By putting things on the map, I haven't memorized where everybody lived, but you can see that some things are fairly far apart, or sometimes you can see that the neighbors are relatively close. course, it houses are closer together in Salem town, and the farms are pretty far apart. Not like everybody's clustered together around one town green. The farms are all map, and I rely on early deed exploration for that. And a few articles that had corrected with places were when other studies had figured out that this house wasn't that old. Well, our house was around, actually still existed under additions and changing the roof. And the location of the Procter house, too, that got clever. And especially the past Salem Village. Cellar hole was excavated a while ago, Witch Trials.
When I visited the Salem Witch Museum now a year ago, May, your beautiful map is there in the foyer. And I enjoyed starting my visit into the museum looking at your map.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm.
Yes, apparently people have found it.
Yes, I find it quite useful. Were there any geographical patterns to the spread of where the accusers and the accused lived?
Interestingly, the 4 girls who were first bewitched, supposedly, 2 of them lived in the past Salem Village. But Ann Putnam is miles to the west, what is now Middleton, and Elizabeth Hubbard, Dr. Griggs's niece, is a few miles east in Salem Village on the Beverly line. So that's not like they're dropping in on each other's kitchen every day, although they would have known each other from that Sunday. And Elizabeth Hubbard is sent on an errand. She mentioned it in the course of saying how Sarah would Spectre and a wolf chased her. But the distance is involved in that. They expected the hired girl to be able to walk all over the place, do errands. But anyway, they weren't just in one close neighborhood.
How much would the ministers been traveling in, or not just the ministers, but any man, with a role for the community? How often would have they been seeing each other and meeting?
They apparently were riding on horses. There's town meetings and the village meetings that are corresponding to town, and on the Sunday services and church meeting, not just the religious services, but the business of deciding things. Like, are we going to pay the minister or not? Not. But local meetings. The men more than the women, I would think, getting around, although the women seem to know what was supposedly going on. A lot of news must have been exchanged, I would assume, on Sundays in the same place.
Were there any other geographical factors, such as proximity to the wilderness or areas associated with Native American presence and warfare, that played a role in shaping the fears and beliefs that led to the accusations?
Well, they were certainly on edge. There was the big attack on York, Maine at the end of January, which would be really getting close. And there were other raids on Andover and Billerica area that was closer to the wilderness, as they thought of it. There was specific raids, and I think Andover got excused from sending militia out because they were needed at home since they were on the frontier. Those towns were involved. The wilderness menace seemed closer and closer, and there were larger planned expeditions going on between the French Canadians and their native allies. And they certainly attacked Wells in the summer of 1692, after George Borrow's get laid. There were planned expeditions that did not come off, but it was late in the season and the weather was against it. Or one side conveniently contracted smallpox. The war was an actual war, not just a war. was a constant during that. And a number of people who were charged with protecting the public, militia leaders and so on, were accused after they failed to do something. Somebody crossed, come too late to rescue a town, and then place he had left got attacked while he was away. And there's not a lot of material in the witchcraft documents about what people thought about him, but people thought maybe he was on the wrong side. But there's a lot of paperwork survived, but not everything.
What do we need to understand about property lines, property disputes, and how that was impacting the relationships between these families?
It was easier to sue in New England than in Old England, and they took full advantage of that anyway. And the deeds, you read now, those are registry of deeds, and online, it's that the line from a big oak tree to this pile of stones over there by the sassafras grove, and obviously they're not there anymore. But fence lines could be not quite accurate, when they decide on them, one party sees it in one place and one maybe a foot or so over. So there were a lot of lawsuits about that. There's the Root Endicott, I think, and not the nurse family, but the minister that they bought their farm from had property line disputes, which included the nurse farm. Who had inherited the land properly? Was it a particular son, or was it the widow that later married the minister in Boston? So the land on time. It's still paying it off. Who owns what? That was a bitter dispute that got Putnam's involved, but not Thomas Putnam himself, but his many relatives. So there were feelings between them, but very well really exacerbated by the who owns the land question. When accusations started revving up, it was evident that Mrs. Ann Putnam, elder, had never really liked Rebecca Nurse, and there's no telling what that attitude began with. They don't spell it out, just it's evident that she really doesn't like Rebecca Nurse or Martha Corey, and that apparently there'd been some big disagreement. Could it be about land? It might be a criticism on child rearing or anything, but we don't know what it was. I'm sure it was a lot of little things that added up to make 5. That sort of addition. There may be no direct association between land boundaries, for example, and an accusation, but it's all in the feeling that I really don't like this person, so she's an obvious suspect.
In the Rebecca Nurse case, we also see that there were hard feelings often between neighbors over fences and things like that. So how did neighborly disputes contribute to the witch hunt?
Well, directly, I'm not sure, but there were fence disputes are real common in county records. And it would be an ongoing annoyance, but nothing else. And if the fence wasn't secure and you wanted it fixed, but it broke or pushed down by an ox or something, then the livestock can get in and wreck things. Of course, let's see, there was that argument between Rebecca Nurse and Samuel Holton about pigs. The Holton pigs got into the nurse yard. Actually, I hear the pigs' trotters are quite sharp, so that they can really make a mess. I could dig it up, plow it up. And then Mr. Holton gets sick and died. So the widow was still upset about that a couple of years later when Rebecca tried. So that's an example with fence and boundary line. But they didn't dispute the boundary, but they didn't keep it secure.
You had mentioned that Andover had so much going on with accusations, and we know with specters. Was there a certain individual who played a role in carrying those accusations over to Andover?
I forget which one, but his wife was ill and he asked somebody to come from Salem Village to see about it. And I suspect Thomas Putnam brought his daughter, whoever else, which, yeah, because the girls are referenced plural. And that really opened a can of worms. And I think Thomas felt he was being a public spirited citizen helping things at that point. He was pretty and totally wrong.
You were part of the Gallows Hill project that looked for the location of the executions. How did your team go about confirming the location of Procter's Ledge?
I had written something about it in 1997 when I asked Salem Witch Museum, the education staff, what did visitors want to know about and the location of one of them. And I knew from Upham that he climbs up to the very top and is certain. Upham is never uncertain that it's up there. But having read some of Sidney Curling's material, he said it's down below. So I put everything together I could find. One clue, actually from the trials, where one of the suspects asked, "Could you see the hangings when they brought you past?" Questioned, and she certainly could. So where she probably was, which you could locate from one of Curley's articles, the house below the hill, would have a good view of the proceeding from up the road. You can't see it now, but then she's questioned in Salem and professes to get out of that. But putting all that together seemed to point to Curley's location, which is the rocky ledge between Procter and Street, off the Boston Road. So that information was out there for a while, but 10 years ago now. Elizabeth Peterson, who was director of the Witch House, so-called city-owned 17th century house that Judge John Cohen lived, she got a number of witch trial scholars, people who were really interested in it, together to see if something could be done so that the land was up there remaining would be preserved. The city of Salem had purchased a scrap of it, didn't have housing on it. In the 1930s, it was called Witch Memorial Land. And it was supposed to be a memorial to people who died forever. Forever. But nothing really came of it because the Depression started too. And it's just land that's not built on and trash flows in. Something there. Giving credit to Elizabeth Peters. She and her family would go pick up trash to clean it out so it wouldn't look like this is what you do with the fire. Candy wrapper could blow in from somewhere else, but there was a cast iron radiator, for heaven's sake, way in the back. So, yeah, that did not blow in, even though there'd been a few hurricanes. So, anyway, a number of us got together, she and I and Emerson Baker from the Salem State History Department, Peter Sadlock of Salem State Geology Department, Ben Ray, University of Virginia, could put together the online version of the doc. That website, absolutely valuable once that came in. Tom Phillips, a filmmaker, so that we could get something done with that. There were a number of us, and we met in the Cohen house, off-seat, at one of us by Zoom in Virginia, and tried to plan how this could be properly memorialized. And it needed to be proven. It had taken so much time since, 1692 and 1997, 1901, when Burley first mentioned it, that a computer program of site analysis had been invented down in Virginia at University. And it would show, if you're standing at a certain place, that would match the anecdotes that Burley had collected of people who in their childhood, the site had been pointed out to them by their fathers. So on. They stood in that spot what would they have been able to see? And if you stand there now, there's a brick building in the way, and trees and stuff, laundromat. But the view shed analysis indicated that if those buildings and things weren't there, you could see what is now called Procter's Ledge, a very clear view. So that helps. And non-invasive ground-penetrating radar and electronic resistivity tests of soil on the ledge, on the city-owned land, indicated that there were no discernible bodies, but also it's granite bedrock underneath, which is acidic, don't last. And the ground was fairly polluted in the area from the chemicals in the shoe factories and leather tanning factories that had been in the area at the end of the 19th or 20th century. And then the Great Fire of Salem started just below that spot. So it was, as they say, disturbed. But there's also legends that people who had been temporarily buried in the area, their families had removed their bodies. So we didn't want to disturb anything that was buried. But with those tests and the viewshed analysis, we had an appointment with Mayor Driscoll if they'd be interested in better memorializing the city land, and they went with it. Hired the landscape architect Martha Lyon, who designed the curved wall with names in it, and the landscape on either side of that plot of land. So that was a good bit of geographical that finally did get figured out. And people with flowers, stuff, their ancestors were just they're sympathetic to what they went through. Knowing where something happened helped, really, not just knowing how far out of town procession would have taken to get somebody from the jail, where we know that was, to the execution site, now that we know where that is. Being in a site where something important happened, it's not happening while you're there, but you're in the same space where somebody did something brave on one part or not brave on the other. But it's important not to just build over them, pave over everything. It needs to be remembered. Yes, places, being in a place, you don't have to appreciate what happened, but it does, it's more of a connection.
What is good for people to consider when they go to Procter's Ledge or to the homestead or to these places that have these memories?
Well, sometimes I would hope that it would remind people that these are real people we're talking about, not fictional characters. They weren't not specters either. They're real people, were real people, and suffered from it. It was no joke at all. I mean, they died. They died painfully. And the rest of the family is influenced by their grief. And in some cases, breadwinner's gone, because men were executed too. That it personalizes over. Although Ledge is in the middle of an urban neighborhood, there's a fair bit of land around the nurse homestead, and it's easier to imagine that this is a different situation. But you're right there, which is nice.
Sarah and I and our colleague Mary Bingham visited Procter's Ledge with a colleague from Nigeria who's an advocate against witch hunts today. And he's used to dealing with these persecutions against people accused of witchcraft in modern times. And it was so moving, he said, when he saw a memorial to people who had been accused of the same things that he's hearing about today. And I took a photograph of him leaving flowers there, and it's now actually traveling in a international exhibit of photographs related to witch trials and modern witchcraft persecutions. So I just wanted to say it's a very moving experience, and thank you for your work on that.
Right. It's nice. It's encouraging that it means something, not just local history and so on. That it means something in the world, or the wider world. Well, that's good to know.
Thank you so much for helping to establish that location and get that memorial there. It's meaningful to a lot of people.
A lot of people worked on it. It was a personal quest, and then it took off like, thanks, Sidney Burley, one of my two.
Yeah. What can you tell us about Sidney Purley? Who was he?
He was a lawyer, and apparently in his spare time, he read every deed and every full law case in the Essex County Courthouse. Considered, I guess, an antiquarian when he self-published a magazine, the Essex Antiquarian, that you can find online. And all the minutiae, not the great sweep of history, but minutiae, which is so fascinating about Essex County stuff. But a lot of it really handy for researching. And thank goodness he did. He also footnoted, which Charles Upham did. And when somebody revealing his big book on witchcraft trials commented that it would have been better with footnotes, he seemed to get quite happy about that, Mr. Upham. I said it, therefore it is correct. But gee whiz, you don't have to imply that someone doesn't know what they're doing to ask where they got the information. You want to see it too. No telling what else is in there. So, of the two, Burley is kind of a nicer chap.
We're curious, what writing are you working on these days?
Well, after I do this, I'll be going back to working on the last chapter of my current book, which is getting longer and longer. It's 8 men of Salem. The companion belongs to 6 women of Salem. 6 men of Salem, the next one. Not 8, please. 6 is difficult enough to chuckle. As I've said before, I was more or less quarantined with all 6 of them during COVID. Had to get down to writing. Yes, it's 6 of them, all of them opinionated in one way or another. But I have hopes that if the manuscript at least will be a finished reality soon, because I've been working on it for over 2 years. I have to do shorter books. And if I ever embark on another biographical work, it had better be one person. But they're all interesting. Do you want to know who they are?
Yes, that was my next question.
I use the present tense because they're still nattering in my ears. In descending order of age, the eldest was Captain John Alden, second, son of John. Second is Reverend John Hale of Beverly. They're not all from Salem. Alden headquartered in Boston, but they're all combined. Then John Hawthorne, judge. Samuel Wardwell, who's a farmer, a carpenter, and a part-time fortune teller. See where that's going. Thomas Button. And then Reverend George Burroughs. So 3 of them will be. I won't tell a spoiler alert, but since you know the history, what happens. But a lot happens in between and before and after. And those who survive, what they do afterwards, what them and how the effect of whatever. It's like spinning plate, I keep saying, to keep all of it straight, and anything else I have to do. But it's fast.
How has technology, it has changed so much over the years. Has that changed your research?
Well, I could find things online, which is enormous boom. I am not a technical person, but the only reason I succumbed to having a computer back when it was new was because I wanted to write. Started out with a candy they don't make anymore, which was comparable to no other system and had green letters on a black screen. Once I got into the internet, thanks to the public library, then you could find things. And especially during COVID, I could find things because the University of Virginia website had most of the documents. That was normal. And being able to communicate by email. And then once COVID started kicking and screaming, I learned how to communicate through Zoom, as I'm doing this moment. So I'm astonished that I, with my usual attitudes towards technology and doing any of that, but it has become necessary to learn. And a lot. And Google Translate helped me with a few French docs. Got the gist of it a lot better than what little I remembered of high school.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to speak to today, or any final thoughts?
From what you said, witch accusations are not a thing of the past, Sarah. And when it's not a literal witchcraft accusation, but as a metaphor, it's harder to recognize right away. Maybe that's what's happening, but humans have not changed. And they're not as up to date as they be. So it's not just other people. It's not just other people. You have to wonder about one's own feelings about things and not go off the deep end just because you're curious what's really happening. And how do we know? But be nice to each other.
Yes.
Which is a wimpy way to put it, but let's be nicer.
Yeah. Really liked what you said about just because you're scared, you still need to get the facts straight. And I think it's important just to play by the same rules and not let fear shape how you deal with situations.
I can imagine the parents in the village were scared that their kids were going to be bewitched next. But really was that the problem. And since we're talking about witch trials, which most people are stolen, and correctly I imagine, that evil witchcraft cannot really be projected. But if you're comparing historical witch trials with some current problem, most people would assume that the historical trial had nothing to back it up, except hurt feelings maybe. But what's happening now, you don't have to suppose that, say, terrorism is impossible in order to prove even that someone is innocent of it, that there is no plot of some kind, like concerned about. It doesn't have to be impossible for it to not happen in a particular case.
And now Sarah has End Witch Hunts news.
End Witch Hunts news. Thank you to everyone who joined us at Connecticut's Old State House on February 1st for our groundbreaking Connecticut Witch Trials Remembrance event. Your presence helped make this first of its kind commemoration truly historic. Together, we honored victims while building momentum for justice in other states. We're excited to announce our next remembrance event being planned for Massachusetts. To join the organizing committee, visit endwitchhunts.org/volunteer. The Connecticut Witch Trials Memorial Project is moving forward as plans progress. We're partnering with Hartford's Ancient Burying Ground to create a permanent memorial honoring Connecticut's witch trial victims. Find our PayPal Gives link in the show notes to give your donation through End Witch Hunts nonprofit. Your contribution will help bring this memorial to completion. Action needed in Maryland and Massachusetts. Maryland's HJ2 and Massachusetts HD 3054 need to advance through committees for justice for colonial witch trial victims, including Rebecca Fowler and Mal Dyer in Maryland, and the 5 women executed in Boston: Margaret Jones, Elizabeth Kendall, Alice Lake, Ann Hibbins, and Goody Glover. Connecticut's successful resolution shows what's possible with community support. Take action today by signing the petitions. Change.org/witch trials takes you to the Massachusetts petition. It needs your signature. Change.org MD Witch Trials takes you to the Maryland petition. We need your signatures. These victims deserve recognition and justice. With your support, we can right these historical wrongs as their stories connect to ongoing global persecution. Together, we're breaking centuries of silence. For more information on modern alleged witch persecution, visit endwitchhunts.org.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Witch Hunt.
Spend time with us again next week.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.